Hello and welcome to the next session of Update by Vegeconomist. My name is Nadine Filko and I am really happy to again navigate you to the next 45 minutes of knowledge seeking. Today is quite a special session for me because we are going to talk about an issue which is really important for a sustainable food future, but actually never came to my mind in the last years. During the research for my recent book, Food Change, many of the interviewees from their own talked about regenerative agriculture. Although when talking about food tech, I always tended to talk about how can we actually make the farmers be part of the future. Now I realize somehow the farmers are making and creating the future. To talk about the really important issue, regenerative agriculture, and how it's a driver of a sustainable future, we have invited two guests today. Tobias Menne, welcome, Vice President Global Sales at Constellar, and Dr. Philipp Vree, Department Lead at Fraunhofer Gesellschaft. I'm really happy to have you here today, and it would be great if you could maybe, Tobias, tell us a bit more about what your work is about and how it connects to agriculture.
Nadine, biggest pleasure, and hello everyone. I'm here because of my personal passion for a future of agriculture, which is much more sustainable and regenerative than what we see today. I personally also have been running a very large farm in Ukraine as Chief Technology Officer in the past, and out of that practical experience, I'm working for Constellar. At Constellar, we technologically measure temperature from our own satellite constellation. And that is very relevant also for agriculture because it really makes plant stress, water availability, so everything around the water cycle and subsequently the carbon cycle very easily measurable and therefore provides data that for really managing this much better. I'm personally also non-executive director of CropZone, a company doing weed management without herbicides, as well as non-executive director of Greener Technologies, also a weed management company really reducing pesticides by 90%.
Thank you very much, Tobias. Philipp, what is your work about and how is it connected to agriculture?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks that I can be here today. My background, my PhD is in farming. I have a background in forestry, so dedicated quite early my career in the field of sustainability. And now I'm heading the unit Bioeconomy Smart Farming at Fraunhofer Institute for Visual Computing. So it's basically I'm as a farmer that is not very good in programming. I steer the directions of a computer science institute, what I didn't expect when I started with forestry, but it's a real pleasure. It's very, very interesting, and our aim is to take the technologies that might have that are rather on the shelf or have been developed for other sectors, using them for making farming more sustainable. And we are looking there in our sectors at crop, so meaning we can detect like certain species with drones. We detect early diseases in strawberries, for instance. We also look at livestock, working with insects, working also in increasing animal welfare, and also working on peatland. So using peatland as ecosystems, very sustainable ecosystems, as they also dedicate to a more climate-friendly land use practice. So this is kind of what we are doing. Fraunhofer itself is, for those of you who don't know, is the largest research organization for applied research. So we are very much different compared to a university, but also compared to a company. So we are the middleman. So we're in between doing applied research. And yeah, so very happy to cooperate with people from science, but also with people from the industry.
Thank you so much for this introduction to your work. Actually, we today also wanted to have Ivo Dane, co-founder of Climate Farmers, here, and he was supposed to tell us a bit more about what regenerative agriculture is, because nobody really knew. Like, the interesting thing was everybody was talking about it during the interviews, but nobody could actually tell me what is this, and there were no standards. Tobias, can you give a definition, or also Philip, and jump in for Ivo now, and maybe tell us a bit more about what this actually is, so we can have a picture of what we're talking about?
We can at least give it a try, Nadine. I mean, for me, regenerative agriculture is sustainability at scale, and probably also with a very practical touch. What we have seen in the past is that more compliance-based logics, so really defining what a farmer is allowed to do and what the farmer is not allowed to do, have their limitations. And here, for me, regenerative farming or regenerative agriculture is much more has a performance perspective rather than a compliance perspective. So what exactly is the impact we see on agriculture, which really widens the toolbox of the grower tremendously, and for me is exactly the right marriage between our demand for high quality food, but also in quite a lot of quantities, and the need for sustainability.
Yeah, I can maybe adding to this, I absolutely agree on this logic. And I think it's very much also using nature as a partner in growing high quality food, and using all the possibilities nature offers, because nature is quite smart in combining different microorganisms, soil conditions, and species that are growing there, and also accepting the diversity and using the diversity of agriculture but by using the land as something to cultivate and take away, because that's still, we need to do it somehow, but we need to do it in a way that is long-term sustainable.
Would you say that farmers are actually already doing that? Like, is that their nature to work this way, or is it something new developing? And how does, for example, Tobias, precision farming come in here, and how does it maybe differ from regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, Nadine, I mean, all the farmers I know anyway are working in a very in a way which is regenerative, because the majority of farmers really are stewards of the land, in the sense that they want to inherit their land to the next generation and have that kind of mindset. I think that's one perspective. Second perspective is that farmers are business people, right? Irrespectively where we are on the planet, and they try really to get along with as few inputs and as few interventions as somehow possible. So out of these two directions, I believe regenerative farming is really at the very close to the heart of many farmers. Now, precision farming is much more of a tool set which helps the grower, on top of what he has been doing in the past, really to get along with even fewer interventions and with even less fertilizer, less seeds, and less crop protection products.
Thank you very much, for this differentiation. I want to say hello to Ivo. He joined our conversation now. Welcome, Ivo Dehn. You are co-founder of Climate Farmers. Do you want to tell us a bit more about your work and how it's actually connected to regenerative agriculture? We already had a definition. Maybe you can tell us what you are working on and how you're going to foster it in Europe.
Absolutely, and I'm so sorry for my being late. I am co-founder and managing director of Climate Farmers. Climate Farmers is a mission-locked company working since 2019 on the mission of building infrastructure for scaling regenerative agriculture. At the same time, we are lacking what we call infrastructure, meaning the space grows so fast. Often they have a shared understanding of what it is, and the conversation about the definition is of course one of these aspects that we are working on to make sure that in the space we can actually create meaningful impact, and the potential of regenerative agriculture can come to its full expression.
Now, thank you, Ivo, for this introduction. We've already heard a differentiation from precision farming. Philip, can you tell me, is there a difference to smart farming, or are these all like words meaning the same thing?
Sometimes they do. I think also for people using them, sometimes it means the same thing. So I'm also quite casual when people are using these words. I just think like often only because something is digital is it far from being smart. And also it's sometimes also not very generative. Excuse me, if it's considered smart farming, but it could being used that way. And I think then it's also, I mean, when we also then in particular looking at soils, it's quite a diversity of bacteria, about the fungi, about also insects that are in combination, working there together on an environment that is in itself a very productive environment. And then smart farming can more enable, I think, these organisms, how they work, how they're being combined. And also with regard to what Tobias said, I think many farmers want to do the practice like that, but it's often difficult doing so. Because sometimes you don't know the information, or you have limited tools. I think it's then also we have the possibilities to open or to give more tools to a toolbox for a farmer, working more regenerative.
So now we've talked about what regenerative agriculture actually means, but we're all, always interested in how is this actually good for protein transition? How does it come in here and maybe help? And what does the industry have to do to change the way they are farming or they are supporting farmers? Can they support farmers also? I mean, in changing the way they are working? All asked. Anyone can jump in.
I mean, first of all, it's a huge agronomic challenge, right, for a grower now to suddenly really integrate more soy, more peas or other beans into his crop rotation. I mean, this really requires learning. This is a substantial financial risk. So the more data and support we can really supply to those growers, really to give confidence that, for example, also the supply chain for these products really can chip in and take part of the risk associated with that transition, can support with its knowledge. I believe this is really encouraging growers really to see markets at the end of that cultivation, and also reducing the risk and steepening the learning curve initially. So I believe there in that way technology really can help with that transition.
Aspects that are really relevant in this is definitely the increased production of legumes and the integration in the in crop production. This is a big part. The critical question is, and this is where it's so important to build bridges in this space, is the production and the integration of animals in agricultural production. Animals in agricultural production are an important part of the fertility of soils, if it is done in the right way. And the key point here is in doing it in the right way. The way that we are producing animal protein today is problematic in many different ways, in the moral sense, in the sustainability sense, in almost every way thinkable. And the way where the protein transition and regenerative agriculture come together is really in getting out of the habit of feedlots and getting into the habit of producing animals in a way that respects their animalness, and working with animals and with land in such a way that really benefits both sides or all sides. And this is often a tricky conversation to have, and it's often a very emotional conversation to have. But this is where there's immense potential for mutual system change, and a bridge that we really try to build as much as possible.
But Ivo, what does it very concretely mean? And for example, I know a farm, 60 hectares in Germany, 200 dairy animals. So I mean, open shed, kind of good standards. So how do you see that kind of farm really transitioning?
So one of the defining elements of regenerative agriculture is the context specificity, right? So it's very hard to say this is what needs to happen on a farm from far away. So I won't make specific prescriptions, but the point is we need animals on the land. We need animals outside of the shed, right? So there are dairy operations in which the farms are, in which the cows are outside, in which they can move, in which the way that they are rotated over the land really creates significant improvement for the land. There are other dairy operations, of course, as we all know. There are dairy operations that are deeply problematic in the way that the animals are bunched together and stay inside and create all sorts of problems, ecological, economic, social. What it means to have animals, host animals regeneratively, in the end is in the integration of animals with the way that the grass grows. And this is the key point. There's a very specific relationship that ruminants have with grass growth. And keeping that right rhythm, it's called rotational grazing often, or holistic management, that really benefits the land. If it is done in a different way, then animals can definitely damage the ecology as well. So it's a lot about the specific ways in which you're doing it, in the same way that in arable farming, it really, really depends on the way that it's being done.
Now we have a question from the audience also. I think that somehow goes in there. I will simply read it to you and are interested in what you think. So often I've seen regenerative ag advocates reject the idea of the transition to a plant-based, plant-forward food system, and that grazing cows is better, implying that regenerative agriculture requires the continuation of slaughtering animals, namely cows. Is this the case? Or could a plant-based food system, providing it boosts biodiversity, restores nature, improves soil health, etc., also be regenerative ag? Are plant-based and regenerative ag compatible?
Yeah, it's a very, very important question. The question is where do it depends on the land. Is the most important question, and the second one is where do the nutrients come from. So there are a lot of arable systems that also provide the ingredients for a lot of the plant-based food that is produced in a way that is problematic, and that is something that we do not talk about enough. Essentially, we do produce a lot of our arable crops that then find their way into plant-based food in a monocultural way, where we have tillage, where we have the usage of plant protection, so to say, that is often pesticides or fertilizers. The integration of animals into agriculture contributes to a natural cycling of nutrients. Slaughtering animals is not necessary. If there's an economic way of doing that, that does not imply this. It is not necessary, but it is usually the economic model behind it. And it's a model that, if it is done well, can be a very animal-friendly way of taking care of the land.
Ivo, I want. Please excuse me. I want to offer a different perspective here, because to me, I've been personally working 20 years for a crop protection or pesticides company, so I believe that's not in general, it's not bad. I believe also here, even what you said, it's really on the specifics, right? So to me, the part of the logic of regenerative agriculture is exactly not to really, right from the beginning, exclude certain technologies, but really make sure that the overall impact on the environment is where we overall scientifically believe that we can really for hundreds of years really continue with that logic, right? So therefore, I would, my personal assumption is we will not change overall society and the degree to which their meat consumption or not on a global level. So there is a need for a significant production of energy within the agricultural system. And what can we do now really to produce this with exactly the ambition we discussed, that it's regenerative. And here, for example, to use technologies which are protecting water, for example, or reducing pesticides, like with smart sprayers, really reducing pesticides by 90% because the current system is not sustainable. I mean, I believe we all agree here. Or to exactly use tillage because it is conserving water, really acknowledging that we have tensions here, right? Because tillage means that we are not really plowing, that we are not opening the soil, that we are condensing water, and at the same time that probably it's also a driver really for the use of pesticides. So in a sentence, I would like to work out certain tensions, say scientific tensions we have in producing enough energy for everyone, irrespectively how that person wants to live and to eat, and to deploy the right level of technology to ensure that it's scientifically based regenerative.
I'd like to somewhat qualify what you're saying. I mean, so I think the important part and maybe an important differentiator between regenerative agriculture and organic agriculture is the starting point, right? So the organic agriculture starts at a certain threshold and says we will not pass this threshold in terms of input, which is a personal choice. I personally buy organic, and this is something we all choose. At the same time, we are aware that organic production can be problematic as well, in the way that it is treating land, and often, unless it is done by a very knowledgeable farmer and a very committed farmer, often does not contribute to ecosystem health. This is sort of something that we know by now. So what we are doing in the regenerative agriculture space is to start at the state where the farmer is, and then from there gradually and consistently improve ecosystem health. So we're improving the ecological, the economic, and the social health. So if we're talking about the definition of regenerative agriculture, to my mind, that is it. So we start where it is, where the farm is, and then we define a state in the future in which the farm is healthier ecologically, economically, and socially. There is more or less agreement on this, not a healthy state of a farm, neither ecologically nor economically, in which external inputs that have a detrimental effect on soil and ecosystems is a good thing. There are ways in which they can be implemented that are not necessarily very bad, right? And what you're suggesting makes perfect sense. But what we are aiming for is always a reduction by as much as possible, and that can be through smart farming, but very often is in practice done by increasing the health of the farm, the soil. The health of the soil leads to healthier crops. Healthier crops lead to less of a need for pesticide input. So what we are seeing is a lot of farms that do not require these inputs anymore, not because of the organic certification, but because it has become unnecessary, and therefore, of course, it is cheaper for them. So this is a very important element.
Now, thank you so much for discussing this. I would like to know how does technology actually come in here and maybe even help these processes, Philip? Like AI, your work is also focused on artificial intelligence. Where does this come in the process of, changing how we are actually farming our food?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's very much an enabler to admit biodiversity and to work with that. Giving a practical example, we have technologies that can identify specific plants that are being grown on the field, and this kind of information can be influenced or can influence farming management decisions. So in one way that I know, okay, I'm not spraying everything, I only spraying on weeds, and maybe there are also other plants that we can use synergies with. And I also get a lot of information from the soil, because often plants are telling a story about the soil. And eventually it's often you not nourish a plant, you usually nourish the soil, and that is then a healthy soil means a healthy plant. So you usually look more at the soil than sometimes on the plant. And for AI, is the beauty is that it's knowledge that is scalable. And I sometimes also have a comparison. It's like you have more people that are high educated walking around on your farm and giving you specific information about what is going on. Because usually the highest qualified farmers farm the largest land, and low qualified farmers, they might have the time or might have like only like small parts of the plant of the farm and can look at it, but then sometimes the knowledge is missing. And for AI, I think that so there are the components that first we can analyze something, but then we can also use this very spot specific information to make spot specific treatments. So have an automation included that. So that helps us first saving resources, but also treating soil in a way that it's very sustainable treated.
Actually, Tobias, your work is with Consular is going in the same direction, with taking a look at where do we need which resources, how much water. Is there anything else like? And how far away is this from the work of an actual farmer? Like, I imagine I'm watching this now, want to, get started off. How do I start? How do I get connected to technology like this? And how do I, do the first steps?
I mean, I would very practically look at, what are my agronomic challenges at the moment, right? And really start with where I see, hey, I have the biggest issue. What's the water balance of my farm? How much pesticides have I been using? How much fertilizer seems to be necessary? How does it correspond to my yield? I believe the most immediate effect is to really look at, the overall, say, what we maybe academically would describe as the overall, say, water carbon cycle, to say how much energy do I really give to the field and how much energy do I take off, and is it in a healthy balance? And Nadine, if you allow, I would just like to generate one more thought and question also here into the round, because we have been so far speaking really about always the question of what's exactly happening on that field, right? What I've not seen is a true analysis of, hey, how do we take agronomic decisions if we're not only looking at the field, but at more at the region around it, right? I mean, is it better for us as humans that we are cultivating super intensively a very small piece of land, or rather extensively than a larger piece of land? And where are the trade-offs, for example? Or when we are applying when we try to have less interventions, or especially less fertilizer, less crop protection, what does it exactly mean really also for the machines and the size of the machines and the number of crossings over a field and this subsequent soil compaction and the issues impacting out of this. So these are kind of, say, questions I was bringing here to this discussion where I would love really to find answers to.
I think maybe if I can, I think that's a very complicated decision to make. And I think it's 100% fair. I think there's like systems in a farming area, they develop somehow automatically into like a certain direction that we would say, okay, that's a hotspot for exporting wheat because there's a harbor close to that. Somehow it does it on their own. If you can make farming decisions that also consider that, I think that's a very tough challenge, and it needs a lot of intelligence. And then we are thinking about this, combining certain information layers, because you're absolutely right. Like if we first only look at with satellite imagery on how crop is developing, It's interesting information, but it's then not very smart. It becomes then very smart if we're adding more and more knowledge layer up to that. So if we know what are the prices and where are like certain droughts appearing in neighbor countries and stuff like that, of course, that would be great. I think then, so I think a knowledge layer combination will happen more and more smarter decision will be made. However, I think also when it comes to crop farming, the bad thing is that we often we won't be able to look completely in the future, never worked out. And then also we are very limited to this, to changing our decision we made. So let's say we planted something in the fall, and then it says like in autumn, in summertime, that was not a good decision. Nothing you can do about it. So sometimes I think these thinkings, they don't have a management consequence, even though they will be beautiful to have.
I think maybe one thought to add when we talk about technology and smart farming. So technology has a way of making what we do more effective and more efficient, speeding sort of the direction that we have taken up, right? And I think the key question here is, do we know what our objective is? So technology has helped us to produce incredibly more amount of food, right? Like we have increased the amount of output from a single farm, from a single hectare, over a very long period of time. The question is this what we wanted? Because the farmer has bought technology in order to increase their output, in order to improve the profitability of the farm. The truth is we have not improved farm profitability per hectare. We have improved output. So yes, the world has more food, but the farm is not better off in many cases. So the key question is really what increases the, again, ecological, economic, and social health of the farm, right? Like what increases, if we talk about economic health, it's not a good idea to produce a lot of food with a lot of input. It's a good idea to make a lot of profit for the farm, and very few farms today are profitable. The regenerative approach is to say what actually increases the profitability of the farm, and what is the appropriate technology for that. And there is a lot of technology that can really help, but there's also a lot of technology that puts farmers into more debt, and puts them in a more difficult situation. The other thing to consider in this is the quality of the food that we're producing. We're producing a lot of food, but the quality of our food has really, really declined. So this is a matter of how healthy our soils are, and how healthy the biology of our soils has a direct connection with the nutrient density of our food. So producing a lot of food is problematic, while producing food in a healthy environment actually gives us food that is nutrient rich. And finally, we have the aspect of climate resilience, right? Like we are today able to produce a lot of food as long as the weather plays along, as Philip said, right? But if an extreme weather event happens, and now the question is not really if anymore, but the question is when, right? So extreme weather events will happen. That really affects the harvest in a traditional industrial system. So tradition is the wrong word, industrial system. So what we have now is not so much the attempt at like the highest peak in performance, producing as much as possible, but we really have to look at, can we achieve a good average in our production, even though climate change will play into it. And there, the key point again is whether or not the soil is healthy. So what we find is healthy soils play into every aspect of what we want out of agriculture: farm profitability, output, and the quality of the produce. And so the real question is, does technology help us improve soil health? And yes, it can. But I think we need to be aware whether we're using technology for the right ends.
Thank you very much, for this in-depth view. We have another question from the audience I would like to chair. Regenerative agriculture may only be as effective as the farm's agro-biodiversity is. This might be a deep-seated systematic issue that may reside at the consumption patterns of our modern society, but not at the farm level. Farmers know how much value a legume has, but consumers and brands may not care. What can be done to increase biodiversity on our plates so farmers have plants as tools to heal their soils? And that goes into the same direction. It's maybe a broader question about what we all have to change and how we can start off. Anybody?
It's also a question on functional biodiversity, if I understand it correctly, right? I mean, what kind of choice do I have as a grower? Grow very different varieties of peas and beans, right? And I believe here modern breeding technologies might be part of the answer, really to offer that choice to growers, so that growers are not limited just to 2 or 3 varieties, but really have far more choice, and can maybe also combine different varieties during one season. So I believe, you know, my personal conviction is that you know, we need to be open for smart or for relevant technologies which help us to be truly regenerative, so that growers really also have then access to a broader choice of germplasm.
I mean, this also connects somehow to the whole value chain and yeah, how, you know, we interact, how we collaborate and together change the system. Are there initiatives or something out there also from companies? I know that like in the interview, some people said, yeah, big companies are taking regenerative ag and actually they're not really doing it, but they're just saying they're doing it. So how can we, you know, really change it? And are there maybe companies that are doing a good job without, oh, you don't have to say a company name, but, you know, like how can we get them all together?
One of the limiting factors is the infrastructure, the supply chain infrastructure. So what happens after the farm gate, right? The question is, let's say we have an old type of grain that is going to be much more nutritious, etc., and the farmer decides to grow that. The question is there a mill that can process that, right? And is there an off-taker for this? So what the asker brings up, which is absolutely correct, is there needs to be a demand for what is grown. And there's, for example, a wonderful book called The Lentil Underground about the arrival of organic farming in Montana in the US, and the challenge of growing legumes in a country that in the, I believe, 70s simply did not eat legumes. There was no consumption of legumes. So as a farmer, to grow legumes, if there was absolutely no market for it, is a big challenge. This is an ingrained problem we have, because if we have very, very high quality, regeneratively produced, no-till, no pesticides, no fertilizer, high nutritious value grain, let's say, and then all of that gets bunched together into the same mill with all the other grains around it, what comes out is not regenerative flour, right? And this is a system problem we have right now that is blocking the transition, because as a sourcing company that wants to say, let's say, produce regenerative bread or cookies, they would need to know that they're actually sourcing regenerative flour from regenerative grain. But right now they have no way of knowing, because they simply know this is the flour that I get from my mill. They don't know what are the farms this comes from. And so all that a company can do is to actually support farms in the general vicinity of the mill that they are sourcing from. And I've just been last week discussing this on a panel with a number of larger companies. This, of course, is an unsatisfying solution. So the few companies that really know the farmers that they source from have that chance, right? They can actually say, let's support these farmers in, I know that, for example, a large potato producer is in that situation where they know exactly the farmers where they source from, and they could motivate them to implement different practices, maybe use older types of potatoes that require less inputs and will produce higher quality potatoes. But this is because they are in the situation that they actually own the entire supply chain or have an overview of the entire supply chain. Most companies don't, and that is an intrinsic problem we have right now.
Philip, in research there, are companies jumping in and actually trying to change something? Do you collaborate with any companies, to change the system?
I think our advantage is that often the technologies we would offer, they would reduce resources. And this is more the selling point. So I think luckily it's not contradicting in farming more sustainable and at the same time using less resources that is saving money for the farmers so that this money is being paid. I think in the cost reduction part, that is often the motivation why companies are working with us or why younger startup companies see a value in creating like these AI-based, more sustainable farming practices. The pull effect from the market, so that people would be willing to pay higher price margins and that these would also been ending up with the farmers. I think that is a challenge ever since. And I think sometimes the hope is bigger than the actual reality. And if talking to bigger mills, we also had for a few month ago, I had a discussion with a bigger mill in Germany, and also talking about like how big is their market for sustainable, regenerative, organic. And say it's minimum. They offer it, they make like small parts of that, but eventually they would immediately change because there are entrepreneurs, and they would change if the market is really requiring that. And so I think that is sometimes the bottleneck is the demand from the customer, and it's often it is somehow.
If
but
there's nothing
I think
offered, then they can't. I'm sorry for barging in.
No, you're right. I mean, it could be both ways. But I think if the system is sometimes not as complicated as if the demand would go up. But you're right, if it's not in the supermarket, who can purchase it? So sometimes it needs a push from some certain direction. And I think then it's also more companies that are stepping in, selling these products. For instance, I'm involved in a company, it's named Bunyan, and they are selling now, or we are selling that's organic based, or it's like legumes to bigger hospitals, to cafeterias, so the bigger, or to in stadiums, to use it as like a ground material or as a basic material for people consuming it on a daily basis. So where they not even need to walk into the store, but it's more on a cafeteria, so where it's been cooked or processed. And this is something that needs to be explained. So for hospitals, definitely has a point. It's more healthy. Eating plant-based diet, especially if you're being sick and need to recover, but it needs to be explained, and it needs to be there. It's also definitely a push. So it needs to be like somehow implemented in the market, but then sourcing the material could be improved, but I think it's solvable.
And warn a bit against the general statement that a plant-based nutrition is going to be better. I think it depends on where the plants come from, right? So if it's actually quality plants that are being sourced, they can be extremely healthy. But there's a lot of very low nutrient plants as well. But yes, I completely agree, and I think this is a chance in circumventing sort of the classic the classic retail market in, for example, working with hospitals or cantinas to provide quality food directly. There's a huge challenge because we often believe that consumer demand drives retail behavior, and it turns out that actually very often it's the other way around. So the way that the retailers behave really has a very large influence on the consumers, and they have a massive amount of impact in driving that behavior. And if there is no diverse food on offer, there is no way of consuming it.
I see. my heart is bleeding because we are actually, we have to end this webinar at some point. And I've now, although you were speaking, Ivo, I shared, yeah, all the information. Vera, again, thank you so much, wrote down so we can share it in the end. But what I wanted, because we didn't touch everything, like we didn't talk about maybe GMOs, or, you know, there's so many issues I see that touch this theme, this part of our sustainable future in food. What would be the last thing you say we should definitely touch, you know, to bring it out there to the people? And then I think we should have another conversation soon.
We should be daring to use new technologies to solve the problems we have.
I would say get to know your local farmer. And the more directly you can source from a farmer that produces on healthy soil, the healthier you are going to be. There is a loss of essential nutrients within the first 12 hours of harvesting. The sooner you can eat the stuff that comes from healthy soils, the better it's going to be for you. And in the process, you're going to get to know a wonderful, dedicated person that you're probably going to learn a lot from.
That sounds beautiful, by the way, Ivo, if everybody would know his local farmer. And yeah, for me, it would be that I think thinking about soil and about the diversity and how using this valuable resource, because it's very limited, and nourish your soil, and then a healthy plant will be created. And it's, I think, the origin for a healthy supply chain, and then eventually to the customer. And then I think as Ivo, as we also said, like the customer demand is not something we can just expect. It can be created, but that is then also a common effort. That is, it needs to be sales, and it needs to be collaboration. It needs to be explained, and it needs to be ideally as something logical to have in the supermarket, that you can trust that the stuff that you consume there is coming from a sustainable production.
So many issues. Thank you guys for sharing all your thoughts and all your knowledge. I have so many more questions. I really want to do another session, but for now today, the time is over, and it was so nice. I really feel updated. Guys outside there, I hope you also feel updated and took some information from this web talk. Our next talk is going to be on 17th of October about processing, and I hope, again, we can update you a bit more.